Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us go about our lives, we find little aches and pains tend to creep up on us, especially as we get older. But I'm starting to hear more and more as I'm out and about that we're beginning to hear young people even beginning to say things like, I'm feeling tired today, I'm feeling restless. And you kind of begin to wonder, what is the phenomenon that's going that people don't tend to say usually, I feel happy, I feel excited, and I especially feel energized, and I really want to do something today that's going to really make myself feel very excited. On the program today, we're going to be talking about some underlying things that might be causing this for a lot of us, and that is toxicity. Many of us go and we feel that we necessarily get colds and flus. What do we do about that? Well, we simply pop a pill. We might start feeling fatigue, so perhaps we need something that'll boost our energy, so we do that the unnatural way as well. And one of the things that we find is we tend to think that perhaps more exercise will help boost our energy and our immune systems is we tend to go out and we refresh ourselves with a nice bottle of water. Well, that could also be a problem as well. On the program today, we're going to be talking with a guest who has been a doctor who's been in more than 32 years of practice in Syracuse, New York. She also serves on several boards, which includes the American Board of Family Practice, the American Board of Environmental Medicine, and she is also a fellow of the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. Now, thinking about all that, she's put together a wonderful book, simply Detoxify or Die. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Sherry Rogers. Dr. Sherry Rogers, thank you.
My pleasure indeed. 44 years of practicing medicine, by the way.
Yeah, I was reading from the inside of your book, Detoxify or Die, but anyway, the bottom line is you've been there for a long time, so I'm letting the listeners know you know what you're talking about.
And the thing is, I'm no smarter than any other doctor. I was just sicker. I have over 24 incurable things, and I'm nearly 70. I don't even have gray hair. I have not had a physical or pap smear in 35 years. I've had no surgery. I have no drugs, and I've gotten rid of 24 things that are, quote, incurable.
Wow.
And that's what led me to write Detoxify or Die, because I couldn't figure out for the longest time how I was going to get well, plus all of my patients. And I was a legalized drug pusher. You know, I went to medical school and had boards in family practice, and later on in environmental medicine, did allergy practice for over 30 years, was an emergency room physician. I was a pediatrician for a while. I mean, I've done it all. And I just couldn't figure out how people got so sick and then what we were supposed to do to get well. And I couldn't believe that every symptom seemed to be the deficiency of the latest drug, until I read the New England Journal of Medicine, which showed that 87% of the physician experts who make the practice guidelines, the recipes for all of us to follow and practice, are financially connected with the drug industry.
Right.
And then it went on and on. Then I picked up the Wall Street Journal, and here's an article from another mainstream journal where 11% of the recommendations made by cardiologists to patients are based on science. The rest are based on pharmaceutical influence. So that opened my eyes, and I realized, well, I had better start learning some things that I was not taught in medical school. And that's how we got started into all of this. And actually, it was a blessing in disguise, even though at the time when I was very sick, I didn't think so. But it turns out that all disease has basically two causes. Only two things that cause most of everything, and most of everything is totally reversible and curable. It doesn't matter what you label it. If it's high cholesterol, if it's high blood pressure, if it's atrial fibrillation, if it's a cancer, if it's chemical sensitivity, chronic fatigue, hypothyroidism. It doesn't matter what the name is. The only thing that matters is what are the causes. How do you fix what's broken? And the two main causes are basically, as we go through life, our nutrient levels go down for probably many reasons that you've already told folks on your show after 15 years, and our toxicity levels go up. And so in assaying all of this, we can figure out how to reverse it and bring about cures where we still, in medicine, are telling people there's no such thing as a cure. For example, take a very common malady, atrial fibrillation right now. We just wrote a whole book on all the cardiovascular problems called Is Your Cardiologist Killing You? Because with atrial fibrillation, first you're given a drug. Sometimes it's amiodarone, which actually in the PDR, the Book of Drug Side Effects, says you better make sure you've done everything you can, doctor, because this drug has a high chance of killing them. And when drugs fail, which they do in a majority of the cases, then the patients are recommended ablation. A laser a device is inserted into the, I don't want to get too technical, into the femoral artery up into the heart, and then the juice is turned on, and they literally electrocute the part of the heart that they think the arrhythmia is originating from, and hoping that that will stop it. And yet in people that I've consulted on from ages 10 to 90, their atrial fibrillation many times was completely cured within 1 to 3 months. Sometimes it's as simple as magnesium, selenium, cod liver oil. In fact, there are scores of patients, even in the medical literature, that show that your chance of getting atrial fibrillation or any arrhythmia after a heart attack is dramatically lowered by just putting people on cod liver oil, for example. But do we do it? No, much less measure exactly, precisely where they should be and tailor it to their needs. So it's really been an exciting time in medicine because it doesn't matter what you have. For example, and by the way, everything I say is totally referenced either in Detoxify or Die. I'm a real reference junkie, so I have to have the scientific backup, or in the subsequent newsletters or books. We have 16 books. But, for example, gentlemen get an elevated PSA, prostatic-specific antigen. So right away they're told, you've got to have a 12-point biopsy. Well, this is a big 18-gauge needle, 12 of them, into a gland the size of a
I like skewers. I just don't want to be part of one.
I mean, there isn't a heck of a lot left after you've done that mutilation. Plus, you set it up more for vulnerability for cancer, et cetera. And in our monthly newsletter, which we've had for a quarter of a century, we give the references and the directions and so forth of how, for example, one mineral, in many cases, selenium, can totally normalize the PSA so they don't need it. In fact, one of my tennis partner's husbands just totally normalized his when they wanted to do a 12-point biopsy. It doesn't matter what the label is of anything. And, you hear, I should do a colonoscopy because that will decrease my risk of dying of colon cancer, which is the number 2 killer, I guess, at this point in time. Well, true, colonoscopy reduces the risk of dying 17%. But guess what reduces the risk 80%?
Give us a good idea on that one.
Vitamin D deficiency, which is epidemic in all socioeconomic and age ranges throughout the United States.
Sherry, and fascinating enough, it wasn't too long ago that we actually did a whole segment on vitamin D, and I was pretty astounded to hear from the person that we had on the program how true what you're saying is. And why is it that we are so deficient in vitamin D? Where does it come from, and what does vitamin D do exactly?
Well, the problem is that we have epidemic deficiencies in all nutrients. Okay. We just had some evidence in the newsletter a while back where 95% of wealthy, these are not little Mexican immigrants or anything, wealthy American children under the age of 12, 95% of them are deficient in vitamin E.
Vitamin E?
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what nutrient you look at because the processing of foods, the phthalates, one of the key things we talked about in Detoxify or Die. The reason I used the example of the phthalates or the plasticizers in that book was because, as the government studies show us, that's the number 1 pollutant in the human body. The studies all began with deformed penises what happened was researchers were out in the wild studying animals, and they discovered that alligators had deformed penises, and then they found that there were reindeer and other animals. And meanwhile, other researchers in other laboratories were looking at cancer cells in test tubes. And when they added estrogens, they knew that that would be fertilizer for the cancer. But in the ones that they did not add estrogen to, the cancer still grew like crazy. And it turned out that all these things had the same cause. Many of the plastics that we get from our plastic water bottles, our food packaging, we cannot get away from it in this era, no matter how hard you try. The levels are over 10,000 times higher than any other pollutant. All of these things also fall into the category of EEDs, environmental endocrine disruptors. They damage the adrenal stress gland, they damage the thyroid. Suddenly overnight you have hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, and they damage the endocrine organs, ovaries, testicles, etc. And they damage the brain. That's why, as we showed in Detoxify or Die, that's one of the best wedding gifts you can give to somebody is a $19 book, because if they don't detoxify, both husband and wife, before they get pregnant, their chances of having kids with problems or not having as high an IQ as they genetically should from the parents they have, and we all see this, a generation of kids who have not become what they're not a chip off the old block. They have not reached the potential that their parents did in many of their accomplishments. And there's a huge amount of evidence now that, for example, by the time a child in the United States is 6 years of age, their levels of toxicants that damage the brain, that damage the sex organs, that damage the hormones, that damage all parts of the body, their levels of toxicants at 6 are where it took people my age until their 40s or 50s to accumulate. They're on a roll. And that's why cancer is the #1 cause of death now in kids under 15. It's totally changing the rules of everything. We have kids, 1 in 8 in some schools, have adult-onset diabetes. They're getting diseases of old age, of old people in their teens and as even toddlers, because we have so accelerated our level of plasticizers and other environmental endocrine disruptors and other environmental toxicants. And that's why it was so important to write Detoxify or Die, to show folks how to detoxify this stuff at home and get these toxins out of the body, because it has to be a lifelong process. It's not something that you just do once, but we all need to do it forever. We've totally changed the rules of medicine.
You know, Sherry, and just talking about the rules of medicine, and as I was reading in your book Detoxify or Die, there were some things that started occurring to me when you talk about the toxicants that we have. For instance, it's in the air, it's in the water, it's what we use, it's what we store our food in, and so forth, all come into our body. But there was one that really occurred to me that I thought was interesting, that you don't hear talked about too often. And again, being a media person, maybe it's just because I'm probably one of the few that may notice this, but you're hearing over the last 20 years or better, but I'm going to say 20 years for certain, that these are all these symptoms, all these diseases, cancer, diabetes, prostate cancer, male sexual dysfunction, for instance, all of these things. The messages seem to be consistent, that they start, it's 1 out of 3, 1 out of 5, or by this time in your life you can expect this to happen. That we just we're hearing messages, this is just supposed to happen. Just live with it. Expect this is going to happen. So there's another form, in my opinion, of toxicity, is the words and the messages people are receiving, about these things. And you don't hear that talked about too much. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, expecting it or just attributing it, chalking it up to aging,
right,
are pretty much the same thing. And that's our whole premise, is that, for example, you're only as old as your mitochondria,
Mm-hmm.
little organelles inside of every cell. And they lose nutrients, and they are magnets for heavy metals, mercury, cadmium, lead, arsenic. And so it behooves all of us to clean out the mitochondria as often and frequently as we can. For folks who don't know what they are, if this is where God's miracle of changing a molecule of food into a molecule of ATP, or energy, the thing that we define life, that's where it occurs. These are little organelles inside of our cells. And, for example, if I were suddenly lying dead in front of you, I would be the same mass of chemicals I was 5 minutes earlier when I was alive. The only difference is the electricity had stopped flowing.
Okay.
The electricity of life, and that's where it's made, in the mitochondria. And they are literal magnets for the phthalates, the plasticizers, the heavy metals, etc. So as they dwindle in their function, you first get tired, you get short of breath, you start getting various diseases because your resistance goes down. But it's all chalked up to, like you say, oh, well, you should expect this because you're old or you're getting older. And that's not true, because they can be totally reversed and revitalized.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you look at at a mitochondria under an electron microscope, it's a mass of membranes back and forth like ribbon candy. And that back and forth ribbon candy is analogous to a battery, the plates in a battery, because that's where the electrical current is created. Now, if you're on a drug like a statin to lower your cholesterol, as we showed in the cholesterol hoax, then that poisons the chemistry of making that electricity. It poisons it by starting with poisoning your manufacturing of coenzyme Q10. It also poisons it in many other ways. Every drug merely works by poisoning a particular pathway to make a symptom temporarily go away. Mm-hmm. It does not cure anything, as we showed in the high blood pressure hoax. Folks who have high blood pressure, a lot of times the first medication they're put on is a diuretic that lowers your blood pressure by getting rid of fluid. Sounds like basic 101 chemistry. Sounds pretty good, mm-hmm. except that diuretics cause the loss of magnesium as well as potassium. And the problem is that for many people, because of the average American only gets a third of the magnesium they need in a day, most people are already low. So when the drug lowers their magnesium even more, now they need another drug. So then they're put on something like Norvasc, a calcium channel blocker. Well, if you're reading the high blood pressure hoax, you see that what that does is it actually shrinks the brain away from the skull and rots the intellect within 5 years.
Wow.
MRI studies show that it actually causes the brain to shrink, as it should, because you have fixed nothing. You have just blocked. That's why all medications are anti-this, blockers, inhibitors, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, anti-depressants. Everything works merely by poisoning a pathway to make the symptom temporarily go away. And I say temporarily because every drug also uses up nutrients in the work of detoxification. Mm-hmm. Well, the person was already low in nutrients in order to get whatever disease they had. So now they're on a roll, and the sick get sicker quicker as soon as you start on even one medication.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your book, Detoxify or Die, the encouraging thing, even though there seems and feels like there's a lot of bad news, is that it's really quite amazing how resilient and strong the body is, even over a course of time of being hammered and bombarded by all the toxicity that we experience in our daily lives. I mean, some people, as you were talking about in here, will live with maladies for years, and it astounds you to think, if your body can live under these conditions, not that you feel great, and in fact, you're diseased or whatever the case is, imagine what life would be like when you can just clean that out and you could have what the body was meant to have, what your life would be like. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're talking about in Detoxify or Die is reversing disease, reversing aging.
Repowering and amping up the mitochondria, getting those power plants to really give the power that our bodies were meant to have.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so many other avenues. If you look at the chemistry of the cell membrane, which envelops every single cell, brain cell, heart cell, etc., all the messages for the function of each cell comes out of the cell membrane. Well, if you look at it under a microscope, it's a double-layered sandwich. And unfortunately, the chemistry of it has changed 60-fold in the last 100 years. In other words, the ratio of the, quote, good fatty acids to the less desirable ones used to be 4-to-1. Now it's 1-to-15. And so for a lot of people, merely giving themselves what we call in Detoxify or Die an oil change, changing that ratio back to where it should be, is enough to cure whatever they have. Because now you've put the cell membrane back with the chemistry of what it should have had long before you got sick. And for some people, they never had it even when they were born. And in fact, well, we can talk a little bit
So to give folks just an idea, and I wanted to draw an analogy here when you talk about the cell membrane, is that, it's likened to driving down the highway in your car with brand new tires versus driving down the highway without tires at all. Would that be a fair analogy?
Sure, I guess so.
Well, no, it was just one that came to me when you were talking about how the cell membrane becomes depleted. You get the oil change going, so now it's lubricating, so now it can receive information. It can do what it's supposed to do. You're the doc, so I'm going to let you take it from there.
All right. Well, the cell membrane, to give people some practical pointers, this isn't all that it takes to correct it, but for many people, in medicine there's the old 80-20 rule, where 80% of the people will be better with 20% of what you have to offer. So that's great. They don't have to do everything. And so if they know that the cell membrane is a double layer, sort of like a sandwich, and you can think of the bread of the sandwich, the two outside layers, as cod liver oil, the innards of the sandwich as phosphatidylcholine powder, and the salt and pepper as the 8 forms of vitamin E, the 4 tocopherols and 4 tocotrienols. And in all the books and the newsletters, we always give the websites of the best forms of these. I don't sell anybody's products or anything. I'm not connected with any companies. The best forms, the websites, the 800 numbers, et cetera, and how to take them. An interesting thing, though, that a spin-off from this phthalate chemistry, which we have gone into a huge amount in many areas, is that researchers have now shown us that when you are first conceived, in other words, when you're in the uterus, already the level of plastics, like the amount that the woman is ingesting from thinking she's doing a good thing by drinking safe water out of plastic water bottles, or even the amount of plastic that she gets from an IV. Or from her cosmetics or from the furnishings at home. We cannot get away from them. They're everywhere. Meanwhile, these levels now, government studies show us, they are already programming the fetus in utero. He's not even born yet, for adult prostate cancer, adult breast cancer, diabetes, you name it. All the various diseases that we've been saying are chronic and there's no known cause and no known cure. It's just not true.
Now, what examples have you seen in your work where you've had someone who has had that long-term, we don't know what it is situation? You list a lot of them in the book, but I thought you might highlight one or two for us to give people an idea of the powerful impact of the simplicity, which is what I've seen here, of what you're talking about.
Right. Thank you, because that is so much fun. Many of the radio shows I do are archived, and so people can go on the website and get them. I guess they save them for months or a year, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll actually call in on a radio show. For example, we had one gentleman call in and say, I'm a farmer, and I was in a wheelchair at 31 for 3 years. I saw all the neurologists around, including a famous medical center. No one knew why I had motor neuron disease, and I couldn't walk, and I was extremely weak, and my muscles just no longer worked. He said, then somebody at church gave me Detoxify or Die. I just followed the things in there, and I'm totally well, and I did not have to sell the farm, quote, unquote, and I'm back to work full-time on our farm. And that's the kind of stuff that motivates me, because I've had, frankly, a very successful career in medicine. I don't need to be writing books and newsletters and doing radio shows. But frankly, I cannot stand to see people dying and suffering needlessly, which is what's happening now in medicine, because it's totally drug-oriented.
Mm-hmm. Now, Sherry, on that topic, because, again, like I said, we've been on the air now. The show itself has been around for about 8 years, and so one of the segments we like to talk in depth about is health and healing, and to really go straighter for the straight dope, if you will. And that is, you hear this message over and over, pharmaceutical companies, they're training doctors, but you also see that there's also changes on the horizon, that doctors are beginning to be trained more naturally. In fact, they're starting to get to a point of requiring nutrition as a segment of their education, which wasn't required before. And, and knowing this, and in knowing all the information that's out there, is there starting to be a change in how doctors approach medicine, or is this just going to take a while?
It's going to take an enormous amount of time, because there's no incentive for it. Their incentive is to get people in and out as quickly as possible.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, if, for example, the Wall Street Journal shows us the average office visit is 7 minutes. The average time that a patient gets to tell his symptoms is 20 seconds. You cannot teach anything in that amount of time. Mm-hmm. It's literally impossible. Plus, in the books and newsletters, we give tests, because many physicians who are starting to learn a little about some of these things will have various labels: holistic, alternative, integrative, functional, environmental, etc. And but when you test them, they don't know enough to fix people. And so we give those tests scattered throughout the books and the newsletters, because if a patient does not have a way of testing the physician right away, then they don't know if they can fix them. For example, there's a deficiency in the United States of vitamin K. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, many people are on Coumadin or warfarin for atrial fib, which poisons your vitamin K. For one example, you cannot heal osteoporosis without enough vitamin K. And yet, how many people, before they put folks on Fosamax, which can literally rot out your jaw and make all your teeth drop out, actually check their vitamin K level? Or, for that matter, how many know how to check the functional assay for vitamin K, or even know what it is? And so we give those little tests, because if he says right away, oh, it's your undercarboxylated osteocalcin, then he's a keeper. If not, he's clueless. Because even more important in terms of vitamin K, for example, when people are on Coumadin or warfarin for trying to slow down their clotting, if they have atrial fib or some other arrhythmia, for example, that drug rips calcium out of the bone and dumps it into the coronary arteries and heart valves, thereby almost guaranteeing that you will need bypass surgery, a stent, heart valve replacement, something in the years down the road, because it's doing the exact opposite of what you're trying to protect against.
Wow.
And yet they're not even measuring the vitamin K.
My goodness. And it would just be vitamin K that you would need to improve, right?
Yes, and many other things. That's okay. Described in ICKY, Is Your Cardiologist Killing You? It's the computer an acronym.
Not that he means to, but is he? Yeah, that's what we want to know here.
Pardon me?
I said, not that your cardiologist your cardiologist is trying to kill you, but, is he? Kind of a thing. When you look at, as I said, for the listeners out there, in Detoxify or Die, it's the simplicity of what you write. And you just find yourself, you don't really need to start from the front page and go to the back. You can just turn to any, but then you find yourself, 10, 15, 20 pages, 5 chapters down the road, you're still reading. And you're thinking, this all seems so simple, so why is it that when we go to the doctors, and this may not be all of them, again, like you said, it's about a time thing, they get you in and out of there within 7 to 15 minutes so they can see the next patient. That's how they make their money. But the thing is, why all this gets so complicated is it so that we feel ignorant enough to be led?
Well, that's why we tried to show, did succeed in showing in Detoxify or Die how simple some of the things are. For example, the far infrared technology, it's a special type of sauna. And to prove how effective it was, researchers took some of the worst patients whom you would never put in a sauna. And these are congestive heart failure patients. People who have congestive heart failure, once the diagnosis is made, the median survival is 5 years. That's less than the median survival for cancers, all types taken, which is 6 years. But congestive heart failure folks, when they're the first ones to die when there's a heat wave.
Mm-hmm.
They're not someone you would ever put in a sauna. Some of them can't even go in a hot bath.
Right.
And yet, the researchers who showed the evidence for the far infrared sauna technology, and we tell where to get it and so forth in the Detoxify or Die, they took these types of folks with congestive heart failure, and they did the impossible. Because when you have congestive heart failure, as we've shown folks how to reverse it in ICHI, Is Your Cardiologist Killing You, and the huge amount of the detox sauna preparation in Detoxify or Die. When you do this, when a person has congestive heart failure, usually they start on half a dozen medicines, and then they just keep increasing because medicine doesn't know what else to do for them. And they get more and more short of breath, ankle swelling, etc., and more limitation of what they can do in life. They rarely get better. They rarely drop medicines. They rarely increase the ejection fraction so they can, it's a heart measurement, so that they can walk across the room again without being short of breath. And yet all these things happened when they did the sauna. Mm-hmm. They dropped medications. They got better. Their ejection fraction improved because it detoxified the heart. And we gave all the scientific backup. As I say, I'm a real reference junkie in the Detoxify or Die. And oddly enough, some of those studies were done at the Mayo Clinic. And yet when I review records of readers on the phone with them from their last 3 years of all their specialties, if they've been to the Mayo Clinic for congestive heart failure, no one has ever recommended a far infrared sauna, which blows my mind because here the work was done right under their own roof. And still it's not recommended. So go figure.
That's like going to a hot dog stand and saying, "Can I get a hot dog? We sell hot dogs here."
Well,
that is what your sign says up there. I guess maybe I read it wrong. But
when I see their records, also, it's the old merry-go-round trick. Uh-huh. They enter the hospital, and then if they just happen to say anything after they've seen the cardiologist and he says they have heart failure, say they something wrong with their stomach, boom, they get to a gastroenterology referral. Then if they happen to say they're a little bit depressed, boom, they get a psychiatric, and they make the rounds of all the specialties that really have not much bearing on all of their problems. And that's the extent of their workup when I see these records from Hopkins and Cleveland and Mayo and whatnot, and not looking for the cause and the cure. Mm-hmm. For example, as we show in the books and the newsletter, there's a wonderful test that it's probably the best one I've ever seen in 44 years of medicine, being a medical doctor. It looks at every vitamin, mineral, fatty acid, amino acid, organic acid, all at once, not piecemeal. Not a little bit here 1 month, a little bit there, but all at once, because that's the way you figure out what's broken and what needs fixing first, what needs repairing. And all this is at prestigepublishing.com or 1-800-846-6687. And what we might do is offer any people who get books or newsletter subscriptions who say they heard it on Daniel Davis's show.
Beyond 50.
15% off.
There you go.
Beyond 50. They should say Beyond 50, Daniel Davis's show, and we'll give them 15% off books or newsletters, because our whole goal is to protect people who want to first cure themselves and then stay well. We also consult on people who are Olympic athletes, et cetera, who are on the other end of the spectrum, because when you subject the body to a huge amount of stress, you also lower and compromise nutrients tremendously, like your 8 forms of E and your phosphatidylcholine when you've run a race, et cetera. So just because some people are healthy and others are on death's doorstep, we all have the same type of things to conquer, because the work of living in this world lowers the nutrient levels and raises the toxicity levels. You can't help it, regardless of where you live. In fact, there's still a lot of old-fashioned people who don't bother cluttering their minds with facts, and they'll say, oh, this toxicity stuff is overblown. What they don't understand is even the polar bears in the Arctic, who have the cleanest air, food, and water on the planet, now have human diseases. They have osteoporosis.
Goodness gracious.
They have hypothyroidism. They should not have these things because you cannot get away from these pollutants.
Well, what's even more amazing, Sherry, even talking about polar bears and all that, is that you look at our pets. They're taking on human diseases. And I'm thinking, at first, are we personifying our pets, or is this real?
No, in fact, there's a lot of people will tell us when they start doing their own diet for their arthritis, their pet's arthritis disappears too. As we showed in the book, Pain-Free in 6 weeks, one reason some people have chronic arthritis, and it doesn't matter what the title is. The medical paper that we published after that book was done on the worst type of arthritis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which to this day is still touted as having no known cause, no known cure. It's totally wrong. And we've followed now some of these kids 20 years, no further rheumatoid arthritis. And this was diagnosed at the medical center, and they were told they had to take methotrexate, a form of chemotherapy, the rest of their lives in order to be pain-free. They do no drugs, and they have no pain because they just did the diet in Pain-Free in 6 weeks. And then, as I say, we published a medical paper after that proving it that 3 out of 4 people with any type of arthritis, if you put them on the nightshade-free diet, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, cayenne, chili, paprika, modified food starch, modified food protein, etc., vodka, eggplant, you take them off that botanical family, they no longer hurt. It takes 6 weeks to get it out of the system. It's very precise. You have to do it exactly right or it doesn't work. And we literally get tear-stained letters from people in a dozen countries saying, I've had arthritis for 20 years, thank you, I'm cured, I no longer have it. And I can turn it on and off like a switch.
Wow.
So it depends on what the cause is for everything. Everything has a cause and a cure. And it's only my disgusting profession that wants to keep it a secret.
Now, why do you suppose that really is? Because I'm sure that you've probably been met with peer pressure, if you will, or, like, for instance, to give you an idea, I know my mother back in the 1980s was talking about candida or yeast, and that there was, and there still is books today about this, and that you should be reducing the amount of yeast that's in the body because these are some of the things that this causes. And I just happened to go for a doctor's visit, and I just brought that up. I mentioned it, and it was funny because he said exactly what my mother told me he would say, and that was this. He says, every few years somebody out there somewhere comes up with a book and blah, 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 blah. So he was dismissing it. And I think to myself, how often let's say, people such as yourself, who in earnest go out there, you spend the time, you do the research, you get the resources, you've actually worked with people, right in front of you, you've seen this turnaround, so you produce a book like Detoxify or Die or some of the others that you've mentioned. Somebody hears about it, they go to their doctor, and their doctor does the same thing this guy does. And, of course, he's the doctor, he's the professional, he spent the time studying, he should know better than I do. So you just blindly go about dismissing something that probably could have turned things around for you. What's going on with that thinking there?
Well, your mother was right on, and probably you inherited a lot of her good stuff, because that's why you're on the radio helping people. Because she's absolutely right. We wrote a whole book on candida, and in fact about all of healing the gut, called No More Heartburn.
Right.
And then this year in the Total Wellness newsletter that we've had for a quarter of a century, we even did an article on the common mistakes that doctors make who do try to help you with candida, who will listen. But as you know, many gastroenterologists and other physicians, internists, etc., deny its existence. And that's unfortunate because, again, we have all the evidence in there. Candida is a yeast that's in all of our intestines. But when you take an antibiotic, for example, it doesn't just go to the bad tooth or wherever you're infected. In fact, it doesn't go to that area as well as it goes to other areas, because that area is so inflamed you have to have special enzymes to make the antibiotic penetrate. Meanwhile, the antibiotic goes everywhere, including the gut. It kills off a lot of the normal bacteria, so the yeast has a heyday. Well, when yeast, like Candida albicans as one example, we used to have a mycology lab, by the way, for 30 years, so I'm very well versed in molds. When that yeast grows in abundance in the gut, it does many different things, as we showed in No More Heartburn. First of all, it causes a widening of the spaces between the cells in the gut walls. So now food antigens cross into the bloodstream that the bloodstream never saw. The immune system never saw these food antigens because it was always protected by the gut wall. So what does the immune system do when it sees something bad? It attacks and makes antibodies. So now the person has food allergies for the first time in their life that they never had before. And like we were just saying about pain-free in 6 weeks, so now if it's due to nightshades, as it is in 3 out of 4 people with any type of arthritis, then they would never think of food allergy because they never had them before. But it does worse things. Candida destroys an enzyme in the gut wall called thiaminase, or it kills vitamin B1 before you can absorb it. So now, some people, their congestive heart failure can be totally cleared by just finding a B1 deficiency, or their diabetic kidney disease, nephropathy, can be cleared with just finding a B1 deficiency. But no matter how much they take, they can't get it in because it's destroyed. Or they get leaky gut, which causes autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis, lupus. And so you see how by ignoring one thing like that, you set the person up for a cascade of diseases. For example, when Candida antibodies leak across the gut, they are similar in structure to antigenic sites of thyroid gland. So now the person suddenly has thyroiditis, and they have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, and so what do the doctors do? They immediately put them on a drug to kill any remaining thyroid, because what it does is it says to the gland, oh, by the way, here's enough thyroid, we're giving it to them, so you don't have to make any more. So as the gland gets weaker and weaker, stops making it, pretty soon you need a higher dose of thyroid. But guess what? The person doesn't feel really energetic because nobody did anything to repair the gland, and so that they don't need the thyroid, or repair the membrane receptors, the lock and key, where the thyroid hormone fits in and turns on the energy as it should. So you see how just resorting to drugs and not looking at the gut leads to a snowball phenomenon. And that's all in No More Heartburn. In fact, for many people, they will never get well because someone was too ignorant to check their gut. And that's because the gut houses half the immune system, and most diseases are autoimmune, and half the detoxification system, i.e. the detoxify or die premise for the whole body. So if the gut isn't healthy, you can't detoxify, you can't turn off autoimmune disease, and you see how the person is on a roll.
Now, Sherry, you mentioned in the beginning of the program that you didn't have any gray hair and you're approaching 70.
Yes.
Now, is gray hair something natural? And if not, is it reversible? What is that all about?
In some people, it has been reversed, and we've had the references in the Total Wellness newsletter. In others, there are more factors at play, including some genetic things. So it's very individual.
Okay. And how about hair loss itself?
Same thing.
Same thing, okay. I just wondered about that. It seems like a simple thing, but, again, there are a lot of things out there saying, hey, you can regrow hair, or, you can reverse the aging by getting rid of gray hair, and you just kind of wonder about it.
Look at TV. You turn on any of the trader shows or, the financial shows, and a lot of the young men, they're not even 45, and they're already totally bald. I've
seen them at the age in their late teens and 20s being that way.
That's right. Because, again, that's back to the oil change that we talked about in Detoxify or Die. We have changed the molecular biochemistry of the cell membrane of the human body. They're full of trans fats. In fact, canola oil is one of the biggest cons since the trans fats. It's worse than those, and that's described in the Total Wellness newsletter and also in the Cholesterol Hoax. So we've changed the chemistry, and so we're seeing, again, like I said, diseases and conditions of older folks in younger and younger folks.
You know what's strange, too, Cheryl, when you talk about changing the chemistry, one of the big proponents of that I've noticed is corn. I mean, this stuff seems to be everywhere, not just in what we eat, but even in things that we have. And I had come across the documentary on that, and, especially when they want to lean toward improving their vitamin E, as you were talking about earlier, tend to lead towards seafood. Well, now our seafood, or fish mostly, is becoming farm-raised, perhaps due to the demand. But they were showing in this how these farm-raised fish, salmon especially, are being fed corn. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, salmon don't eat corn. Corn doesn't grow in the ocean or in the rivers as far as I know. So when you talk about changing the chemistry landscape, my goodness, are we just going crazy here? What's going on with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, over 40% of corn now in the United States is genetically modified.
Right.
So that really galls me that they think they can one-up God and make a better gene, make a better product. But the worst thing about the corn is one of the worst is the high fructose corn syrup, or just sometimes it'll just say corn syrup on the label, because as we've referenced many times in the books and newsletters, one of the ways that researchers, quick and easy, down and dirty way to create rats with diabetes, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, is to feed them high fructose corn syrup, the same thing the American diet is laced with. And you're right about the farmed fish, because real fish, because they eat sea vegetables and other fish,
right,
they are high in omega-3 oils, as in cod liver oil. Farmed fish, many of which are fed things like a dog food in big 50-pound bags, which are often omega-6 because it's cheaper to use corn, for example, or soy. They often are also laced with trans fatty acids, as are a lot of pet foods. I did some chapters in some veterinarian books a few years back as well, and these things translate to our pets as well. So for many of the farm fish, you might as well have a prime rib and enjoy it, because it's the same chemistry. Probably a little better.
Different color, perhaps, depending on who cooks it, but it's certainly the same thing. Now, Sherry, with the little bit of time that we have left, I know you talk about a cocktail. It's a Detoxify cocktail, I guess, if you will. And I got interested in this because sometimes I feel brain fog, and I think there are a lot of people out there that feel the same way. Go ahead and talk about
that.
What's that?
candida makes acetaldehyde, which makes brain fog, too.
Ah, okay. And what's a good way to decrease or avoid the candida, I guess, altogether?
Oh my gosh, that's like the whole topic of
that's
no more heartburn. But there are some proprietary herbal blends that have done a good job with people, depending again on their total load.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead with your other question. I'm sorry.
Well, it was back to that Detoxify cocktail, because what I'd noticed is vitamin C powder was one of the things that goes into this. And then there were some other things, but, just kind of describe for our listeners something they can take away with today until they can get a book or visit us at our websites to get more that they can do starting now.
Sure. The original detox cocktail that I wrote, and then we have expanded and added to it, depending if you have heart disease, etc., erectile dysfunction, blah, blah. It was to look at phase 1 of detoxification, phase 2, and then something that would keep those rolling. And so we found that the leading nutrient for phase 1 could just be a simple heaping teaspoon of vitamin C powder. The leading nutrient for phase 2 would be glutathione, and the best form we found actually recycles itself. And then the nutrient that we make in our mitochondria, if they're healthy enough, to recycle all of these so that we get more mileage from them, is R-lipoic acid, not to be confused with plain lipoic acid or alpha-lipoic acid, of which only 50% is usable. So R-lipoic acid. In fact, someone... now
this is the letter R?
Yes, R.
Okay, as in Ronald, lopaic acid, okay.
Yeah. And one of our readers actually made a ready-to-make detox cocktail with lower doses, but albeit with some stevia, so it was sweeter for some people, and in individual packets so they could travel. And that's at 1-800-HAPPY-BODIES. And as I say, I'm not connected with anyone, but they did make that after having read the book, because they realized that some people, it was just beyond them, and if it weren't easy and quickly made for them already, that they would deny themselves that. And in fact, we just had... I just did a phone consultation on a reader who first put his mother on the line and said, "Oh, I have to tell you that I was seeing doctors, I forgot what her condition was, for 4 years, and I just then found your detox cocktail in Detoxify or Die, and that cleared my symptoms, so thank you."
Mm-hmm.
So you just never know what each person's deficiency is and how easy it might be to fix.
Right. And then there's the other way, where as anybody who's seen any commercial about any particular drug, about an ailment that you didn't know you have or you think you might have because the symptoms seem to be so general, that you might want to move in this direction. But what's interesting now is that they're showing a long list of adversities that go along with taking this, and I'm thinking, well, if I'm going to eliminate one to take on another 13, where's the thinking in that?
Well, I think they're getting tired of all the lawsuits. I mean, Vioxx,
we're not responsible. We're just telling you this might work, but this certainly could do this. I mean, even leading up to impossible death. I think I'll just live with this for a while.
Well, they're trying to get a little more reality-based, because even though Vioxx quadrupled the heart attack rate in some studies, Celebrex is a first cousin of it. I mean, it's not that much different. And the thing is, they work on the cell membrane. If you do the oil change that's in Detoxify or Die, a lot of people don't need them. And if you do the nightshade-free diet and pain-free in 6 weeks, many do not need any more pain medication. And yet, when you take the NSAIDs, then you actually deteriorate the cartilage chemistry, guaranteeing you will need a hip or knee replacement.
Mm-hmm. So now let's take a look back to a person goes to the doctor, as I mentioned earlier. You go for a checkup. You bring up the idea of, like, for instance, I did this yeast thing, and your doctor tends to say, every few years somebody comes up with this, or this is nonsense. What would you say to people who might find themselves in that situation? This could be a doctor they've been with for years that just decides they kind of want to dismiss that or overpower that, or, make you kind of feel silly deep down inside for even bringing it up in the first place. What would you say to those people that they might consider doing something different besides that advice?
Well,
perhaps?
Once they read for example, if that person had a yeast problem, once they read No More Heartburn, they would probably diagnose it themselves. If they're reading the Total Wellness newsletter, they will find that there are websites where you can order your own tests, because no doctor should be privy to your tests, especially if he doesn't even know how to use them or when to order them. Mm-hmm. And there are also websites that we have in the newsletter of this year, 2012, where people can get their test drawn if their local lab will not do it. So they can become their own doctor if people around them are too ignorant and unwilling to come into the 21st century where we find the cause and the cure of things, and we don't merely bludgeon every symptom with a drug.
Right. Okay. Now, Sherry, if you can, for the listeners out there, go ahead and give out a website or websites where they can find more information and even take a look at your newsletter.
Sure. Prestige, Prestige, and the website is merely prestigepublishing.com, prestigepublishing.com, or 1-800-846-6687 Eastern Standard Business Hours. And just mention that they heard it on Beyond 50 radio show hosted by Daniel Davis, and ask for a 15% discount on any orders of books or newsletters. We have newsletters going back 25 years because a lot of that information, for example, like the selenium reversing your prostatic specific antigen, they're just not anyplace else. And so what a saving for someone. And we're talking less than $1 a week. I mean, it's not a huge amount of money. So that our goal is to empower folks and let them know that they have the biggest role in curing themselves, not one of us doctors. We're here. We're supposed to be educators and leaders. The body heals itself when you give it enough information and correct enough of the deficiencies. And so we are really, the original word for physician meant a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff, and we can all certainly learn and begin to teach ourselves and perhaps others as well. Fascinating topic, detoxify or die. I'm sure we're going to have you back on the program again and talk about some of the other things here to encourage people to really take health into their own hands. After all, you have to live with the decision that's made about your health, so why not make it a good one that you feel good about? Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I didn't know that was an invitation. I'm sorry. No, except they might just remember that when everything else in medicine has failed, then go ahead and unleash yourself and learn how to cure it. As it says in 1 Corinthians in the Bible, has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world? And if there's anyone out there who's in the last stages of cancer, ask for the free sample cancer issue at the publisher. And you will see an example of someone who is a 46-year-old nurse given 48 hours to live. 5 years ago, she was 13 years later, and I introduced her on a cruise lecture. She's very well.
Oh, my goodness. Diet. Fascinating. Like I said, it's amazing the miracles that are out there, and what's even more amazing is that the body lives the way that it does in a world of toxicity and can even hold itself for as long as it does, and it's probably just begging, can you give me a shot to show you what I can really do?
Well, we have enzymes in us to detoxify chemicals that were invented yesterday.
Oh, my goodness. That's just amazing. The book is Detoxify or Die. Our guest today, Dr. Sherry Rogers. Sherry, thank you so much for joining us here. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the program.
Oh, my pleasure, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you again. And for those of you who may have missed those links, you can simply go to our website at beyond50radio.com. We do have a free weekly e-newsletter. We'll have a hot link up there as well for Detoxify or Die. Beyond 50, that is the number 50. And be sure to sign up for that free weekly e-newsletter as well. We also thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.